On the computer. What on the computer? It says the bandwidth is low.
Okay, everyone. Good evening. My name is Attorney Rita White, and I am the Black Women Lawyers President. I'm glad that you all have been able to be present and attend this presentation, which is a very important presentation. We are now, thank goodness, made it to 2021. And one of the kickoffs that we want to discuss is Black Health Matters. We want to make sure we get off to a good start, 2021. We care for ourselves. We make sure we maintain our health and make sure we're very much on top of all the health needs and matters that we need to tend to through this year and throughout the span of our lives. So we have several panelists that are going to be presenting during this presentation. We have 3 medical doctors, physicians that are going to be presenting. Our first presenter is Dr. Monique Butler. And then we have Dr. Ijeoma Opara. And we have Dr. Orande White. So with that, I am going to turn the table over to Attorney Robin McCoy, who is the Vice President, and she is going to introduce the moderator and the panelists.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. I'm glad that you have joined us for this event. Happy New Year, happy Kwanzaa. So I'm just going to give some brief information about our panelists before I turn it over to the moderators. So we have our first guest panelist is Dr. Monique Butler. And if Dr. Butler could raise your hand so we know who you are. So after a national search, Monique Butler, MD, MBA, was selected as the Division Chief Medical Officer for HCA Healthcare's North Florida Division, a division with 15 hospitals with over 14,000 employees in North and Central Florida. Dr. Monique Butler is a native of Inkster, Michigan, and she started her career at, oh, there she is, yeah. Her career at the Detroit Medical Center before joining HCA Healthcare, was the Chief Operating Officer of Children's Hospital of Michigan. Previously, she held positions as the Chief Medical Officer at Detroit Receiving Hospital and Sinai Grace Hospital. Some of her honors, she was noted as a woman of excellence in STEM careers in Michigan and was recognized as one of Michigan Chronicle's 40 Under 40. Most recently was identified as Becker Hospital Review as one of the 50 great American leaders in healthcare to know in the nation. And so it also, while she was in Denver, Colorado for a short time, she was recognized as a woman SOAR honoree by the Northwest Douglas County Chamber, an award given to women who inspire others to be better leaders and blaze the path for future generations. She is passionate about eliminating healthcare disparities, ensuring that everyone has access to great healthcare, and creating a pipeline via the Pathfinders program to increase the numbers of diverse healthcare teams across the nation. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Butler to give a brief 5-minute introduction and to talk about, healthcare disparities in the Black community and specifically as it relates to Black women.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you so much for that introduction. It's just an honor to be before you all today. Hopefully you all can hear me pretty well. And if someone can let me know that you can, that would be great.
Oh yeah, you're fine.
I'm fine. Okay, good. Well, I was just honored to be able to take some time with the organization to be able to share healthcare disparities. I wanted to start out with it being MLK Day to just talk a little bit about what the great Dr. Martin Luther King said when it comes to healthcare disparities. I wanted also to be able to share, I put a PowerPoint presentation together, and when I try to share my screen, it says only the host can share. Rita, would it be okay to hand me the ball so that I can share my screen?
Yes. So if you want to continue and let me put this together. Okay, you should be able to now.
Okay, for some reason I'm not able to share my screen, but I'll just start with, Dr. Martin Luther King, in the spirit of this holiday, this very important holiday, mentioned of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health is the most shocking and the most inhumane because it often results in physical death. And I'm going to take just 4 more minutes to talk about that physical death that Dr. Martin Luther King was speaking to around healthcare and equity. And so I just wanted to start with definitions. Health equity means social justice in health. And that just means that no one is denied the possibility to be healthy for belonging to a group that has historically been economically or socially disadvantaged. The difference with health disparities is that health disparities are the metric we use to measure progress toward achieving health equity. And so if I was able to share my slides, you would see here, I want to go through and talk briefly about the different risk factors that seem to impact Blacks more than any other group. And so from diabetes to high blood pressure, asthma, and cancer, and most importantly, coronary artery disease or heart disease tends to impact us much more. And it's because of the risk factors that we face that cause heart disease or kidney disease to be more prevalent. So diabetes and high blood pressure in Blacks, 33% of Blacks ages 35 to 49 have hypertension or high blood pressure as compared to 22% of whites. Diabetes, another risk factor, 10% of Blacks aged 35 to 49 have diabetes as compared to 6% of whites. And the issue is that we tend to suffer from these risk factors at an earlier age as compared to in other races. These type of ailments happen at a later age. Renal disease is a big one. So kidney failure. Blacks have 3 times the rate of kidney failure as whites. And this statistic really hit home for me. 1/3 of patients on dialysis in the United States are Black, but we represent only 12% of the population. I'm going to repeat that. 1/3 of the patients on dialysis in the United States are Black. So 33% of patients needing hemodialysis or peritoneal dialysis for kidney function are Black, and we only represent 12% of the population in the United States. And I really can't talk much about racial disparities without mentioning the COVID-19 pandemic. And we know that the COVID-19.
You can
Yes.
share now.
Okay.
You should be able to.
For some reason, I'm not able to. It's not. I'll have to sign in. I'll just keep going and just thank you, Rita, for that. So when we're mentioning the COVID-19 pandemic, we've heard on the news that the pandemic has just raised the curtain around healthcare disparities. And it's something that me and many of the other physicians, I'm sure on the panel, have known about already. But the COVID-19 deaths per 100,000 people in the United States by race or ethnicity, and this is as of July 30th, 2020, 74 African Americans per 100,000 have succumbed to the disease versus 30 white Americans per 100,000 have succumbed to the disease. So again, you can see the disparity with being double. But I can't speak about healthcare disparities without talking about the cause. And there are many policy changes that need to happen to help us with decreasing the number of health disparities that we suffer from. One is redlining. a Black family with a 4-bedroom home, 3.5 bath, based upon location, goes for $300,000 versus a white family, $700,000, right? So again, just the ability to build generational wealth is inhibited by redlining. But then also from residential segregation, not everyone has the same opportunity to be healthy. In certain parts, particularly in our big cities, there are, food deserts where inability to get healthy food. In many places throughout the suburban America, you have areas where there's, primary care physicians are plentiful, areas where there's walk space where you and your family can walk safely, green space where you could, be able to just enjoy the outside versus in some of the residential areas where there is a gap. And then police brutality. We can't have a conversation around healthcare disparities without talking about some of the policy changes that need to happen with police brutality. And one of the stats that stood out for me is Black people are most likely to be killed by police, 3 times more likely to be killed by police than white people. And 30% of Black victims were unarmed in 2015 compared to 19% of white victims. So when people ask why the disparities, this type of treatment raises the blood pressure, right, of many individuals. And then the inability to be able to access great food and great housing and great care like others would be able to raises the blood pressure, causes you to be more susceptible to disease. And chronic racial trauma, which is an entity that's starting to be studied more often, is something that we really need to look at and really need to record and understand so that we can start to minimize the amount of racial disparities and health disparities in our nation. One of the big ways that we can do it, and I am undertaking this in my new role, and that is increasing the number of Black physicians in healthcare. Detroit is a mecca, I call it, I miss it too, a mecca of Black physicians where you're able to have a larger number of physicians who are able to stay in the community. But in 2015, the medical school graduates, out of the entire medical school graduating class, 6% were Black or African American and 5% were Hispanic or Latino. And then along that same vein, Black or African American applicants have lower medical school acceptance rates than their peer applicants. So this is a call to action for all of the medical schools across the nation to ensure that their population resembles the population of the United States. If only 6% African Americans graduated from medical school, we need to increase that number. We need to make sure we hold the deans accountable that at least 12% of their population every single year is African American. And then I want to end with just this one amazing study that was published in the Washington Post on January 13th, just last week, where it talked about the mortality rate, we're talking infant mortality, for Black babies is cut dramatically when Black doctors care for them after birth, researchers say. So just think about that. When we look at infant mortality, we know in the African American community that we have a higher infant mortality rate. And this study revealed exactly what I know and what I'm sure doctors Ijeoma Opara and also Dr. White will express, that when we increase the number of physicians and healthcare workers who look like us, that trust will go up. And this study just proves that the mortality rate for Black babies is cut dramatically, so 50%, when Black doctors care for them after birth. So that's my presentation. I'll stay on for questions. Thanks for the opportunity. I'm sorry I couldn't share my slides.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Butler. Yeah, if you could go ahead and email us your slides, we can share that with the membership. And so okay. I'm gonna turn back so we have 2 other doctors and we have a moderator. So we have Dr. Ijeoma Opara. And Dr. Opara received her medical degree from Wayne State University School of Medicine and is a graduate of Detroit Medical Center Internal Medicine Pediatrics Combined Residency Program. After she served as Chief Medical Resident, currently she is a double board certified assistant professor of internal medicine and pediatrics at Wayne State University of Michigan. And she's associate program director of the internal medicine pediatrics residency and attending physician with Wayne State University Physician Program. She is the founding director of an innovative initiative and curriculum, Healthy Equity and Justice in Medicine for internal medicine pediatrics, and pediatric residents She's the co-founding director of Wayne State University Global Health Alliance, a multidisciplinary organization created to unify university and recent global health practitioners and create a collaborative community of best practice in global and urban health. As far as awards, she's had awards from Wayne State University College Teaching Award, the WSUOM Excellence in Teaching Award, the African American Leadership Council Campaign Activist of the Year, Distinguished Alumni, Wayne State University School of Medicine. So that's Dr. E.G. Opara. And then our next panelist after that is going to be Dr. White. He's board certified in internal medicine from 2005 through the present. Presently, Dr. White is a senior staff physician with Henry Ford Health System in the Metro Detroit regional area. He has worked in traditional and internal medicine role for 16 years of his career with outpatient and inpatient care. He's worked as a faculty member for approximately 3 years, teaching and supervising residents at the Detroit Medical Center, the Authority Health Residency Program. He supervised medical residents regularly as a member of the medical staffs at the Detroit Medical Center, Ascension Providence, and Ascension Borges Medical Centers from 2005 to the present. He's had extensive experience in both outpatient primary care medicine, inpatient medicine as a practitioner in various capacities since graduating from Sinai Grace Internal Medicine Residency Program in 2005. He's also served as a member of the Hospital Peer Review Committee for approximately 3 years, and he's focused his care on hospitalized patients and regular care of COVID-19 infections, and he currently serves as senior staff physician for Henry Ford Hospital. And then finally, our moderator is Stephen Butler. He's a PhD candidate at FAMU, Florida State University College of Engineering. He's a McKnight Fellow, a program to increase the amount of African-American professors in science and engineering. He's in civil and environmental engineering program with an emphasis on environmental sustainability. His philosophy is to look for the right fit and solving engineering processes. He's always made sure that solutions have a win-win for all living things. When failures occur, he makes sure that they fail safely for further research. And he also, ever since early in his career as an environmental chemist, Stephen Butler has used his PPE, personal protection equipment, as a priority every day. All levels of perfection, from an N50, N95 mask to a full hazmat suit with an oxygen supply as a tool to study air, water, and soil. And his investigations have included analysis of hazardous material in an area on an influence on media that could impact human tissue. He's performed these duties in 300 cities throughout the United States. He's originally from Detroit, presently lives in Tallahassee, Florida, and is married and has one beautiful daughter. So I'm gonna actually turn it back to Dr. Opara to give her presentation for us. So without further ado, I turn it over to Dr. Ijeoma Opara to talk about self-care.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me and can you see my slides?
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome. Yes. Thank you so much. Just so kind, everyone, Rita and the leadership of the Black Law Women's Association of Michigan, and just really want to appreciate you all for giving me this space to have this conversation this afternoon. Very grateful. And it's my pleasure and honor to talk about the topic of self-care and self-compassion as directed by Attorney Rita on this afternoon. And you know, it's a very huge topic, so forgive me if I try to channel it and sharpen it just for the few minutes we have with each other, but hopefully we'll get to robustify during our question and answer session. So why is it important that we talk about about self-care and self-compassion? Well, basically, by virtue of being a Black woman living in a white supremacist, patriarchal, capitalist, ableist, homophobic, misogynistic country as the United States of America, there is chronic intergenerational stress and trauma that we live under, that subjects us to being vulnerable to multiple conditions, of which these are a few. So infectious disease, cardiovascular disease, so hypertension, strokes, diabetes, lung disease like COPD, asthma, skin diseases, eczemas, etc., GI or gastrointestinal conditions, metabolic disorders like thyroid disorders, cancers and autoimmune illness like lupus, multiple sclerosis, fibromyalgia, etc., etc. And so we know that there is increased strokes. So just as my wonderful colleague, Dr. Butler outlined, we have these health disparities, and we have to talk about the causes of the causes. And the causes of the causes are rooted in structural racism as it manifests in terms of housing, criminal justice, economic, education, and of course, health inequities that then result in the disparities that we observe. So truly in living within that context, we have these stresses, okay, that renders us, to experience intergenerational trauma and stress that increase our vulnerability to illness. And in these times, what illness are we most concerned about, if not COVID-19, and otherwise known as the Rona, right? And so absolutely, when you compound upon that, the role that the Rona has played in our health and health outcomes and the health outcomes of our communities, I heard a few people earlier in the meeting talk about the losses they've experienced. So we've experienced great loss, disproportionate to our population in the country, as Dr. Butler outlined and gave you the numbers. We've experienced great loss in terms of the economy, in terms of employment and housing, etc., and finance. We've experienced incredible loss, stress, and trauma, pardon me, in addition to what everybody else is going through with the staying at home and the financial loss to businesses and other economic issues, and wearing your PPE, your masks, and all those other things. So truly, it is so important within this context that we talk about, well, as we contend with the structures and systems of oppression that rendered us vulnerable to the disproportionate impact of this pandemic, and has always rendered us disproportionately vulnerable to the impact of any injury or insult to society, be it disease or otherwise, right? It's not changed in the last over 400 years. It's the same cause, right? But as we contend and we advocate, and we are activists, and we struggle and war and battle, with those structural causes, we still have to take care of ourselves, okay? And the other piece too is that we have some science and literature that's come out that shows that even when we are that folks that advocate for themselves, so that there's a role in addressing health disparities for self-advocacy, and that Black people, particularly Black women, are the least of all the rest of the demographics in this country to advocate for themselves. And so we know that those who advocate for themselves actually have better health and better health outcomes of those who have chronic illnesses. And so the ability to advocate oneself is also connected to self-care and self-compassion, okay? All right. And so when we talk about self-care, what do we mean? Well, Dr. Johnson, who developed this model, and so I cite and give credit to her, talks about the 5 principles of self-care. She defines self-care as the development and maintenance of a consciousness that informs a lifestyle to restore health and balance. The development and then the maintenance. See, it's one thing to develop, right? But it's another thing to maintain, right? A consciousness, right? That informs the way we live our lives to restore health and balance. And so she divides those 5 principles of self-care into the buckets of consciousness that would then inform lifestyle, of which there are 2 principles. So the first 3 principles as it relates to the consciousness for self-care, number 1, include deep work, okay? So deep work. right? So identifying behaviors that repeatedly lead you to experience illness or poor health, then determine the root cause of each of those behaviors. The second is authority, making a plan to change each behavior and heal from any trauma you've experienced, and ensuring you are intentional and consistent and asking for help when needed. And the third principle is reconnection, reactivating your self-awareness and intuition and reconnecting with spiritual energies and communities. And so by going through these principles, it's able to elevate our consciousness around self-care to then inform the two principles that speak to a lifestyle of self-care, which is 4, the principle of exploration, trying a variety of activities that help you to build and maintain your self-care consciousness, and 5, accountability, checking in regularly with a sister circle or other group of like-spirited individuals like this organization, okay? And so I talk about self-compassion. You cannot have self-care without self-compassion. And self-compassion has actually been studied as part of the self-advocacy literature to talk about, and field of study to really, and has really been identified as a powerful unit or element of self-advocacy that is related to positive health outcomes. So what is that? There are 3 aspects of self-compassion. One is mindfulness. That is recognizing when we're stressed or struggling without judging or overreacting. The second element of self-compassion is self-kindness. That is being supportive and understanding towards ourselves when we're having a hard time, rather than being harshly self-critical. And the third element of self-compassion is connectedness, remembering that everyone makes mistakes and experiences difficulties at times, and we're not alone. I found this tool that I think is amazing. It's called the BREATHE acronym, the BREATHE tool. And this is from a paper written by Sister Stephanie Evans, Kanika Bell, and Singa Burton, all doctors, PhD doctors, scholars. And their paper, Learning to Breathe Towards a Balanced Model of Black Women's Wellness, I thought will be very useful for us on today's conversation. And so the acronym that they propose to help us towards this journey of self-compassion and self-care in order to attain a balanced model of wellness and mental health is BREATHE. B stands for balance, R stands for reflection, E stands for energy, A for association, T for transparency, H for healing, and E for empowerment. Balance means to engage in the purposeful repositioning of one's commitments such that all priorities are addressed. Reflection means to set aside time for contemplation and performing emotional and cognitive audits. E for energy stands for reinvigorating goals and setting a path upon which to achieve them. Association stands for create and maintain social networks that promote, affirm, and encourage wellness. Transparency means to actively avoid remaining silent about painful experiences, very key. Healing is looking for ways to nurture wellness in self and others. And finally, empowerment, enlisting one's own agency by accessing internal power sources and taking ownership of one's own wellness. In conclusion, Rita asked me to talk about some of the things I do for my wellness. I'll tell you, the number one thing I do for my wellness is to basically practice and love the word no. In other words, to create and enforce boundaries. Okay, now I couldn't, in all honesty, practice that with Ms. Rita because, you know, she has her way. And when she said, I need you to talk next weekend on a Sunday afternoon, I couldn't practice that with her because she's my sister, that's fine. But in all seriousness, generally speaking, my best approach, my best tool for wellness is the word no. And really insisting on that. But this is a wonderful tool that has been passed around among sister scholars in various communities, Black Self-Care Bingo. And I want to invite you to review it and see which ones you do, which ones you can start doing that are very helpful. I want to call your attention to calling your mama and them which is basically leaning upon your support. I do that a lot. My mom and them are a huge part of my self-care. Validating your own emotions, I do that, really. Journaling and writing, talking to a therapist. We need to do a better job of normalizing mental health care and therapy in our community, and it's huge. Okay, staying hydrated, setting boundaries. I told you about taking walks, praying, making love to others or to the self. And you can see that right here. Okay, so making love is a tool. All right, and we know that to be true. So they truly is a number of active, concrete, pragmatic things, and it's just a matter of making a routine and planning and scheduling it. The way you schedule that war path you're about to go on to change the world is the way we need to schedule our self-care practices and exercises. So in conclusion, just want to remind you, a saying from Naira Wahid, I love myself. The quietest, simplest, most powerful revolution ever truly is to love ourselves, love who I am as I am, without judgment, shame, or guilt, and just accept all of me. And from there, I can do the same for my brothers, sisters, and the rest of the world. Thank you so much for your attention during this time, and I turn it over to the moderator.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Dr. Opara. That was amazing. If you could send us the your PowerPoint, that would be awesome, so we can share that with our membership. And so we're going to turn it over to Dr. White to give us his presentation and talk about preventative measures. So without further ado, I turn it over to Dr. White, Dr. Rhonda White.
Hello, everybody. So I've already been introduced. So yes, I'm Dr. Rhonda White, and I am I'm starting to become, I guess they call me a senior physician now, although I don't consider myself to be too senior. So anyway, so I was assigned to talk about preventive care, like how do you help keep yourself healthy and how do you help prevent illness? So, in talking about this, my wife, attorney Rita White, asked me to talk about the history of health and actually of humanity, because this is how I started to explain to her the difference between eating healthy for your body versus eating what you like or what you think you like. So let's see. So science says, there's some controversy, but science says that human beings have been around for about 200,000 to 300,000 years. And during that time, for the most part, we have been existing in a very hostile environment in which people have to try to find their own food, something that none of us really even think about in a modern day era. We have abundant food. Whether it's healthy or not is another matter, but people had to find their own food. So during the bulk of human history, people have not had abundant food supplies. And because of this, people routinely throughout history have done what we call, to some extent, starve. So this has very important implications as far as human health. So, when you go through human history, we talk about hunter-gatherers. And these people basically had to go out and hunt and gather. So they would gather, like nuts, seeds, fruits, whatever they could find. They would have to hunt animals as they were able in order to survive. And that was the predominant bulk of human history, how we existed. So approximately 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, roughly, or no, 2,000 to 3,000 years BC, roughly speaking, we came up with agriculture, which was the earliest form of agriculture, which is not modern day agriculture. And at that time, people started to develop the ability to grow large amounts of food. But just like in the natural world, the original natural world, before we started mass producing food, there would only be certain times of year where food was abundant. And we call that generally the time of harvest. So people developed adaptation skills to deal with that in the pre-modern, pre-industrialized world. And one of those things were that we learned the ability to stock away energy and calories. So in science, we talk about there are two main pathways. One that we call the Krebs cycle, in which we produce energy, and that's what we call oxidative, like respiration. We use oxygen for that, and we sort of burn sugar for our energy. The other cycle is what we call beta oxidation. And beta oxidation is when we actually use fat, oftentimes from our own body's tissues that we store. So when we talk about Black health, Black people are the first people on Earth, and we basically developed in a tropical climate. So there are several very specific direct implications for that. Is that one, intermittent fasting in the modern era has been shown to help improve people's health, has been associated in some studies to suggest it may improve longevity, which sort of makes sense, but you don't want to starve too much. So the issue is that the beta oxidation pathway is how we burn fat. And this is actually, now when we're taught this in medical school and science, we're taught beta oxidation is the backup pathway. In reality, beta oxidation is the primary energy production pathway for humans, and burning sugar is actually sort of the backup pathway. This is how humans existed for the bulk of human history, and that is mainly the bulk of human history is Black history. So, from a health standpoint, eating a lot of sugar is bad. Okay, so so we go through all of these things, and one adaptation is that in a tropical climate, the temperatures are higher, and people tend to breathe off more water, perspire more, and they lose water more, and they lose salt in the process. So one adaptation that Black people have that is, for everything in adaptation, there's a pro and a con, is that many people, the kidneys in Black people are more what we call in a modern era, salt sensitive. We retain salt in water better than other ethnic groups of people, but the implication of that is that in a natural world, most foods are very low in sodium by today's consumption standards. So because of that, many Black people end up, when they start developing hypertension, we talk about salt sensitive hypertension. So eating a lot of salt is something that generally is going to adversely affect many African people. So that's one of the issues. And then the other issue is the pigment in our skin. So our skin pigment is an adaptation to exist in a tropical environment in which you can't hide from the sun. So because of that, our pigment actually absorbs and neutralizes most of the rays of the sun. And a fraction of that we actually use to produce vitamin D in our body. And throughout history, this is the predominant way we get vitamin D, which is one of the key regulatory systems in the body that helps regulate your metabolism and your mineral balance by regulating the amount of calcium and phosphorus, which indirectly affects almost every other mineral in your overall body's mineral balance. So now, in the North Atlantic slave trade, we're over here in America, which is not a climate that we are used to. So because of that, most Black people have been found to have low vitamin D levels, suboptimal levels that are not ideal to maintain human health. So these are things about us as a group of people living in an environment and a climate that we did not come from that are adversely affecting us now. And these are just physiologic things. And then you throw in all of the systemic racism and disparities that had previously been mentioned, and it's a recipe for disaster. So, so the issue is that these things, what happened when we talk about human history, here in the last century, we started having all of this highly processed food where we don't even eat or use or consume natural food, many of us, for days, weeks, or months on end. So the issue with that is that this highly processed food is really not food. A lot of these things that we consume as food are actually food fractions, which means they have refined the food in which they have just taken out isolated portions of the food and they package it up and give it to people as food. And us being in a climate that we're not from, and usually the main food fractions that they pack into foods, especially most of the processed foods we eat today, are sugar and sodium, which are the two very things that are most detrimental to Black people on a long-term basis to consume. So, so these are very important issues right here. So, as far as how to like prevent disease, most of the disease that Black people are really suffering from in the modern day era are things that are directly related to diet and lifestyle. So we know about issues as far as what was previously alluded to, people being under stress, and dealing with discrimination. And these things have a very specific physiologic effect in the human body we call the stress hormone response, which actually accentuates all of the other adverse things that are happening to our bodies by most of us eating on a regular basis highly processed food. So in a natural setting, we have foods, and the number one thing that's really destroying many Black lives is really sugar, more so than sodium, but it's sugar. And what happens in the natural setting, our body has a reward system for everything that we do that's beneficial. And most foods in a natural setting are complete foods. They're whole foods that people take for granted. They don't really think much about what whole foods means. And that means you don't process the food and strip away just one component out of dozens of compounds or even sometimes hundreds of compounds, and then just give that one or two things to a person. So the issue is in a natural setting, most foods are relatively low in sugar, especially if you go throughout the African continent. Most foods are not high carbohydrate foods, and most of them have a significant amount of fiber, which causes our body to get low level sugar exposure and slowly absorb it. And that is much more physiologically beneficial for our metabolism. So nowadays, because most food is packed with sugar and packed with things like flour, which is another food fraction where they take some of these grains and they take almost exclusively the carbohydrate portion and just give that to you in a massive quantity, that has a very adverse effect on the human body, and that it causes your blood sugar to spike. It causes insulin levels to increase. And this is what causes the body type build that we see nowadays so commonly, where most people have big bellies and big abdominal sections. And that is actually something that triggers a lot of inflammation inside of the body. So the bottom line is to cut to the chase, as far as what you can do to maintain your health, is you want to eat whole natural foods as much as possible. You all have already heard this. Things like whole things like fruits, vegetables with minimal processing and minimal cooking for most of these items. And when you do cook, you should avoid, eating them with things like white flour, like things like cake, and like these biscuits you get from KFC, designed to be highly addictive, this type of stuff. When we eat foods that are extremely high in sugar and carbohydrates, it overstimulates our reward center much more. And there are a certain proportion of the population who are extremely sensitive to this massive sugar rush. And this is why, you all have probably heard them reference that they found that sugar can be more addictive than even street drugs. Virtually any street drug that's been developed to date. And this is one of the reasons why, is because that hyperstimulation of the reward center, especially some people are more susceptible than others, causes people to crave the wrong foods more and more. And high sugar also causes your body to absorb the trace amount of toxins that's found in all food. There's no perfect food. Everything has a little trace of toxin. High sugar content causes your body to increase absorption of the adverse components of food dramatically more than usual. And when you have that along with low fiber and high fat and all of this stuff that we usually eat, this is a metabolic state that is adverse to health. So I explain all of that to say that eating I can provide more information specifically, but basically, your general fast food restaurant meal is not really healthy, especially if you have the pop, especially regular pop with the sugar added. It's extremely detrimental to the body. So that's sort of like that's a surface level as far as trying to explain to you how many different ways that high sugar and high salt diets that are highly processed with minimal fiber or sometimes almost no fiber just really tears up the human body. And this is what's accounting for these health disparities predominantly is a poor diet that's destroying the body, resulting in all of this cardiovascular disease, hypertension, kidney disease, the need for dialysis, and all of this stuff at disproportionately high rates in the African American community, and also directly relates to why COVID-19 has had a very dramatic, disparate impact on our community because all of this hyperinsulin, hypercortisol syndrome that people get into by eating this bad diet and being a group of people being discriminated among has caused many of us to have this extremely disproportionate inflammatory response, often ending in death at a disproportionate rate. So,
Okay, thank you, Dr. White. I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Mr. Stephen Butler. Actually, I heard the doctors have answered a lot of some of the questions that we have, but we still have some questions. So, Mr. Stephen Butler, our moderator, if we can turn it over to you to ask some of the questions that we have.
Very well. Thank you for having me. Doctor, I want to go back to Dr. Opara. I want to know, what are your suggestions in terms of tools needed for the self-care, and what do you use for in light of the pandemic? What are some of the tools that just yoga, meditation? I'm sure you can go into a myriad of tools that you use on a personal level that you would suggest to your friends and family to pick up. What would your commentary be on that?
That's a great question. So I know I went through the list, the self-care bingo pretty quickly. I'm very happy to pull that up again while I'm talking so folks can also kind of peruse the slide. Can you see it? Can you see it?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah.
I can
So
see
you
it,
can
yes.
peruse the slide for examples and ideas, but if you're asking specifically what I do, I try to apply the tool, the Breathe tool I told you about, in terms of balance and reflection and energy association, transparency, healing, empowerment, all of that. But the tools I use, number one, I started to be more intentional around getting quiet time in the morning. So meditation and practicing mindfulness. So I've always prayed, not as much recently. I have to admit, I was much more of a prayer warrior when I was younger, but I definitely have revisited the prayer, and so leaning on my spiritual and spiritual and faith base, whatever that is for you. But doing that more praying, my quiet time in the morning before I start my day. I'm working on that consistently. I'm not as consistent as I wish to, but at least I've been better than I used to be. And it's about progress, not perfection. So that piece about quiet time, really trying to get centered and balanced and quiet and reorient myself to what truly is important, what truly is my purpose, what truly is priority, and ensuring that my day speaks to those priorities rather than getting distracted and getting overwhelmed and stressed. So that is one of the tools. Another huge tool I use is leaning on my community. I have a community of sister scholars, sister physicians, sister scholar activists that I lean on, and I share through social media, Twitter, more commonly. Now I've discovered Clubhouse is another app. So we're getting together on Clubhouse and having these conversations. I call them, we talk on different media. So leaning on my community of like-minded folks and really leaning on my support system has been huge. Spending time with my family is another tool that I use. And just really just basking in the love of my mother, my father, my sisters. My sister is one of your members, Attorney Kelechi Akimbosede. My children, my husband, my nephews and nieces by marriage. So I that is another tool that I use. I do journal as well, and I talk to a mental health professional because it is very, very important. It is very, very key, and we need to normalize that in our community. We all are traumatized in some way, form, or fashion, either intergenerationally or just by virtue, like I said, just being a Black person and specifically a Black woman in these United States, honey, operating in a white supremacist, patriarchal, capitalist, ableist, homophobic system is stressful. And so we all undergo this trauma response. And so really engaging our mental health resources to bolster us is very key. So taking care of the physical, the emotional, the mental, the spiritual, all of it together. This is so important. And of course, like Dr. White talks about, eating healthy as much as possible. Again, I have a lot of work to do. I'm trying to be like Dr. White, but that is certainly something that I strive for. So that's my personal piece. But you can see here this bingo. Feel free to pick at any of them. And I mentioned the boundaries. The boundaries is huge. Saying no. I am not Superwoman. There is a trope around Black women where we're superheroes and we just always save the day, which we do. But that constant pressure of being the Black superhero, savior, caregiver of the earth, and ignoring ourselves is something I am actively rejecting in my life by setting and enforcing boundaries and saying no. So that's a huge tool that I use for myself. Great question. Thank you. And I hope my response was helpful.
Very real, Dr. Poor. I see you well published, and you're a contributor to many papers on diversity and inclusion. That's a great thing that you're doing. I want to ask a question to Dr. Arande White. You being like you said, senior physician in terms of treating our community, Detroit, and the suburbs of Detroit. Well, get back to the question. You spoke a lot about preventative care, um, but now we have a vaccine. And what is your take on vaccine, and what have you heard in terms of, naturally it's positive, but what are the negatives, and what, give us your input.
Well, okay, so the vaccine. So my take on the vaccine is I think it's a powerful tool to help control this pandemic. So this vaccine is a little unique compared to prior vaccines, and one is that one of the things that anti-vaxxers have been talking about for decades now is like they used to put like these preservatives in these vaccines, and one of them in particular had mercury, and we know like heavy metals are bad for health. So this vaccine, it doesn't even have like preservatives like that in there. The second thing is this is a messenger RNA vaccine, so it goes in your body and stimulates your body to produce the proteins that are recognized as the virus. So if your body encounters the real virus, your body has made antibodies against these proteins. I mean, I completed the vaccine series myself. I took the second dose more than a week ago. The first dose, I noticed absolutely nothing. I even wondered if they gave me a placebo. But the second dose, I had a very significant reaction to, actually. Yeah, I actually did develop a fever, and my heart rate was up in the middle of the night. Usually when I get infections, I tend to have nocturnal symptoms, and then they go away in the day. That lasted a couple of days, and then it went away. My take is this. I think that vaccines, as long as they're produced in a very high quality fashion, I think that they're good because they can help stimulate your immune system so that your body already has a head start in the event you actually encounter the real deal infection. So that's my take. I think the vaccine would be helpful. I think it is helpful. And I think as time goes on, I mean, we already have a significant amount of safety data. So far, there's been nobody who's died as a result of the vaccine. There's one questionable death of a doctor who died sometime later, and that's going to have to be investigated. It's not really clear if that doctor really died from the vaccine or already had something, whatnot.
Thank you, Dr. White. It, another question, do you, and I know it's hard for you to recommend one vaccine over the other, but in terms of the data that you've seen, and what you would know our wish list, you would know what we'd be looking for. Is it anybody that's precluded from taking a vaccine based upon health conditions?
Yeah, so basically, the people who are really advised against taking the first two vaccines that are actually similar. So the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines are very similar. They basically work in just about the same way. Um, in that situation, I think, uh, well, okay, let's say like this. Okay, what point, what part are you mainly interested in about this? You're
But,
asking about?
yeah, but I understand. Okay, so uh, as you said, as been
You said, well,
informed,
which one is best is
as
what you're saying?
yeah, which one?
Okay.
You have a Johnson and Johnson one, you have a Moderna one, you have a Pfizer, you have
I mean,
that.
at this time, nobody can really answer that. What I can say is this: as far as the two that are the first two approved, the Moderna and the Pfizer, I think it probably is not going to matter much in the end. I mean, there's a slight difference as far as the some of the fatty substance that they can bind the vaccine and formulate it with. There are just very slight differences between the two, but as far as the formulation, they're almost identical. So now, as far as some of the other vaccines coming up, some of them operate along some of the more traditional vaccine formulations, like sort of making a sort of like an attenuated version and this, that, and the other. They're testing that in some small mammals right now. Obviously, nobody's going to volunteer for that one, to see if attenuating the COVID virus is enough to keep it from killing you, maybe. Um, or if it gets in your body and it suddenly becomes like the Incredible Hulk and regains its strength, and boom, you're gone. So, but at this point, there's just not enough data for these other vaccines. Right now, they're still collecting data and they have to submit the data, prove safety, and then get authorized. So that question is going to be answered in the future. But I don't think it matters much whether you get Pfizer or Moderna's vaccines that are available right now.
One more excerpt to that. What about children taking a vaccine? Is it any limitation?
Um, well, as far as in general, for most people, the main contraindication to these vaccines we have right now is if you have a history of like anaphylaxis, like severe allergic reactions. If you have any history to that, you probably shouldn't play with this vaccine. And you definitely need to tell anybody ahead of time that you have, like be honest about your health history and exactly what kind of problems you've had before. Um, I think that's the main issue at this point.
Very well, very. Thank you so much, Dr. White. I want to go back to Dr. Butler. Um, what Dr. Butler, what have you heard in terms of disparities that are directly as a result of COVID-19 and directly affecting the Black community?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know that we want to talk about COVID-19, and we really can't have a talk around health disparities without talking about COVID-19 because it's just such a big impact in our community. All the risk factors that we talked about earlier, and Dr. White hit on those, also Dr. Opara, which was, the risk factors of high blood pressure, the risk factors of diabetes, the risk factors of hyperlipidemia, all impact our ability to deal with such a, a virus that really can take over the inflammation in the body and cause it to just spin out of control. The patients that I've seen with COVID-19, definitely the biggest risk factor is the risk of hypertension, diabetes, but obesity. And Dr. Arande White talked about that. A lot of times we say that, our bodies are bigger because, just our sort of background around, our weight has been something that a lot of us we have a difficult time talking about, but it's truly a level of risk that causes us to not be able to fight disease in the way that we should. And so those self-care habits that Dr. Opara talked about will really play into the ability for us to ensure that we have a healthy weight. That's one of the biggest risk factors that I've seen from patients with COVID-19.
Very good. This is for all the panelists, and this applies to our scribes and our counselors, attorney, and judges. What do you think? Is it advisable to open courts back up when everyone is vaccinated?
I'll just weigh in just quickly. As soon as we are able to get everyone vaccinated, which is the best remedy to end this pandemic, we should be able to go back to business as usual once we have herd immunity. And the virologist, Dr. Kay Corbett is the viral immunologist. She's a sister who was very instrumental in putting together the vaccine. The recommendations are for us, once we get vaccinated, get the two doses, as Dr. Rondite mentioned, and White mentioned, I get my second one this week, so I'll be, ready with Motrin and Rondite to make sure I'm okay. But as soon as we're able to get everyone vaccinated, the researchers say about 70 to 80% of the communities have full vaccination, meaning they received the two doses, that we should be able to go back to business as usual once we know that we have herd immunity. But I do want to give a point of caution that until we get everyone vaccinated, until the researchers and the powers that be with the CDC say so, we should continue to wear our masks, continue to social distance, and continue to wash our hands. But yeah, absolutely, we should be opening the courts. But I think the biggest role that this body of great attorneys can do is to impress upon the importance of individuals in our community getting vaccinated.
Yeah, I
Uh,
just want to
my,
build
oh,
on that. Yeah, I completely agree with Dr. Butler, and we really need to move forward, in a strategic, intentional manner, a coordinated, well-coordinated manner towards achieving at least 70 to 80% vaccination rates for our respective communities. And until then, we have to, continue to use the tools at our disposal to maintain that distance vis-a-vis the, technology and the digital platform, which I think has been used to actually address some of the inequities that we have seen around access to services, whether it's health or in law. But you all would, the experts in that would tell me, but I imagine that it would, given in the city of Detroit, our dismal transportation rates and, access to transportation, etc. So these are just some thoughts around that. But yes, certainly concurring. I also wanted to weigh in on the children and vaccination question. For Pfizer, the Pfizer vaccine has been approved down to 16 years of age, and Moderna 18 years of age. So folks that, for children, adolescents, young people 16 and up can get the Pfizer vaccine, and young people 18 and up can get the Moderna at this time. They are still enrolling children because, as you well know, they're not going to test on children. They start with adults for anything because of safety concerns. So that's still an ongoing process around increasing the numbers of kids that are being studied to really assess the safety and efficacy in children. But at this time, there is approval for Pfizer vaccine down to 16 years of age and Moderna to 18.
Dr. White, did you have a comment, Terry, or?
yes, I had a comment. So as far as my take on combating this pandemic and as far as the vaccines go, the vaccines, I believe, could be very helpful. But my concern is mainly one thing, when Donald Trump came in office here in this country, he sort of dismantled the pandemic, office that was already, formed to be prepared to have readiness. But as far as the global community and seeing this pandemic, we face very serious challenges that are very concerning to me. First off is that they're going so slow in this process. It's clear that the whole global infrastructure for combating pandemics is so grossly inadequate. The biggest factor in this is a race against time. It's just like random events. The longer that this virus has to spread through the human populace, the more mutations it will accumulate, and it's only a matter of time before it renders our first round of vaccines either less effective or obsolete. And this is what happens with most viruses if you let them go long and far enough as they spread. What they have through at least about 8 billion people that they could potentially go through to have the opportunity to reproduce. I mean, number factors of numbers more than quadrillions of times in that process to spread through the human populace. If we don't move fast enough and develop the infrastructure to respond promptly, because this is probably going to happen again, eh, then we're setting ourselves up for potential problems. The other thing is, if the virus mutates enough and we keep going at a snail's pace, that it can render our present first round of vaccines obsolete. The next time we develop a vaccine, they could have specific adverse effects on us, like what we generally call autoimmunity. Many of these coronaviruses we don't produce much of an antibody response to, and that's an adaptive mechanism because having antibodies is not necessarily a good thing because once in a while the antibodies can actually damage our own bodies to some degree. Usually the degree of autoimmunity is subclinical, so people will not notice, and over months, the antibodies will effectively go away. But when you develop these vaccines that have these high grade antibody responses, developing two, three, four different versions, eventually we could develop one that is not really usable, and then we'd have to let this thing run its course. So my biggest concern about fighting the pandemic is they have to be fast enough to crush this thing before it's like we're just, it's a matter of time before this virus, it could either burn itself out or it could burn us up and become even more deadly, more infectious, which is what we're seeing with the UK variant at this point. Not more deadly, but this one is spreading much faster. And even in China, it appears that now their ability to contain this virus that they were bragging about just a couple months ago, that they were the only place on earth who faced COVID and really had a sustained period that they could control it, and now they've lost control. And they're so concerned, they just know what in 5 days they built a 1,500 bed hospital in 5 days and plan to add another 5,000 bed capacity. And this is not actually funny. I mean, I'm just saying that
Right.
this virus is, so I just think that hopefully Biden and the WHO and the world community comes together and says, you know what, we have to really be ready the next time because we can't play for 3 years with the virus. There's a way this is playing out. It looks like it's going to be 3 years because we have to be able to even help underprivileged companies squash this thing so that it just doesn't keep cycling through the whole planet. We wipe it out here, but now it's like a forest fire over there, and they weren't vaccinated because we don't have the production capacity. And that's my biggest concern.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'll just add this really quickly, though. Aronde, when you look at the number of minorities, right? African Americans, Hispanic, according to the CDC, there's like an 18% rate of individuals who are willing to take the vaccine. And what the three of us are saying, and all of my friends in the medical community, it's immunology 101. mRNA is what we learned probably on the first or second day of medical school in immunology, and we trust the science. But to the point that you just made of how many people we have to get vaccinated, and perhaps we can turn it over to some of the attorneys on the call. What is the hesitancy? I understand a lot of the distrust of medicine. I know, I talked about the lack of numbers with physicians who look like us. What happened to Dr. Susan Moore, a physician from the University of Michigan who was maltreated for her pain and died 2 weeks later. I get it. But when you talk about, how soon we need to move through, I've had this conversation over and over with many communities such as this. Still, the acceptance rate of taking the vaccine, even after this amount of time and how many people have been we had the research on, is still dismal, still low. So that's what keeps me up at night, in addition to what you said. We're dying at rapid rates from COVID-19 as compared to other communities, but we're hesitant to get the vaccine. So it becomes a vicious cycle that will perpetuate the healthcare disparities that we talked about. So we got to do a better job of making sure that more people know that it shouldn't even be a choice. It's really, we have to do our part in public health to stop this pandemic.
I want to get in on this, and thank you for lifting that up, Dr. Butler, because that was one of the I was going to reflect in that light. So in my work in basically teaching and researching and working in advocacy around health, and teaching and researching around anti-racism, justice, and health equity, the point that you raised, Dr. Butler, is very pivotal, is very key. So if many of us are dying disproportionately from this disease, and we know that the disproportionate impact of this disease is the root cause of it is structural racism, and there still hasn't been any coordinated strategic effort to address that root cause. And we're still over here in the superficial sense trying to get people vaccinated, and people are smart. They're like, I know you need me vaccinated because you need that herd immunity so you can get back to life as usual. So in the meantime, in between times, have you answered the reason I don't have grocery stores in my neighborhood? Have you
Right.
answered the reasons why my school system is a hot mess? Have you answered the reason why the police don't leave my sons and nephews and my husbands and my boyfriends and my fathers and uncles alone? And then, of course, some of us, of course, the women as well. Have you answered the reason why when I try to apply for a loan at certain neighborhood, you all refuse me, but when Chad
Absolutely.
applies, Chad gets it even with less of a credit report? You know, have you answered all these things, right? While you're busy out here trying to get me vaccinated. And if we don't speak to the people directly, so my issue isn't, I have no blame for Black and brown people and by BIPOC folks that are not taking this vaccine. We've done a poor job. You know, Dr. White talks about, you know, the disinvestment in public health and
Yes.
pandemic readiness. That is just a small part of the gross disinvestment in public health and healthcare systems that are human centered and are equitable and are just, that really take into consideration the structural and social determinants of health, that truly do bring the community to the center of what it means to be healthy, and design systems that are healthy and that put them in the center, and that are just, that reconcile and restore around justice, right?
Sure.
As it relates to that. We haven't done that. We have not done that as a nation. But
Absolutely.
we're in their face talking about, yeah, get your vaccination. Yes, they should. Yes, we should. But if we haven't done the work that is needed to be done, our numbers will stay low, and it will not be BIPOC community folks. It will be a system that insists on staying racist. That
Sure.
is
No
the bottom
question.
line. So I think for us, as we have these conversations, we need to be intentional about lifting this up. Too many times we hear, especially people that don't look like us, so we need to not participate in that, right? Really using blaming, not that we're not here, but I'm lifting up the fact, because we've all been part of different panels or listened to panels, language that blames the community for like lack of knowledge or being ignorant. There are folks on the street that can probably break down mRNA more than me,
Sure.
but
No
are
question.
refusing to take the vaccine, and they have reasonable reasons. So I think my contribution, or my sort of perspective I'm lending, or lens shall I say, is that we start to really flip the narrative around, and not saying that, you know, Black people are unlikely to take the vaccination, but that again, the healthcare industry is unlikely to vaccinate Black people. And why are you unlikely to vaccinate Black people? Because you're unlikely to listen to the real reasons as to why they're not taking the vaccine, the real reasons that they're claiming to be dying and to have poor health, and strategize and intervene on those things. They're not. So that's sort of my thing, is like, how do we flip the narrative, and how do we build coalition with our legal, counterparts and folks across sectors to really have a robust, holistic, truthful, restorative strategy and approach to improving those vaccination rates that are going to be rooted in historical and contemporary justice type lens. Like that's
Absolutely. And we should
that's
hold
what I think
people.
we need to innovate around.
I'm with you 100%. We should hold people accountable to that. But I'll just tell you, Dr. O'Para, we don't have a lot of time. You know, all of the issues that you've talked about, we know that they're present, and definitely there's no need to say that, you know, anyone is at fault, and that's definitely not my approach.
No,
But I do
I know
know
it's
that
not
that
about you.
time is of the essence. You know, and so we can sit here and talk all day about all of the inequities, right? And that was what was on my presentation, and we know it. But I'll tell you, a lot of these individuals on this call that are Black physician, Black women attorneys have a lot of power. You know, I see a judge that I go to church with, a lot of power. We need to be collaborating and
Absolutely.
communicating to make
Yeah.
sure that we hold people accountable, i.e. Biden, i.e. Kamala Harris, to
Yeah.
ensure that all of those inequities that have existed
Yeah.
for 500 years since we've been here, right, that we correct those. But do we have the time to wait for that to happen now? No, people
Well,
are dying. They are dying day after day. LA has had the largest number of people ever infected. They reached what, 1 million. I've had family members, many of us have had family members who are dying. We have to prioritize what's first. But you're absolutely, I agree with you 100%. But see,
But may,
the time for sitting around trying to get people involved, you know, a lot of people are in power that we need to help collaborate and ensure
yeah,
that we're
and hold
infusing
accountable.
capital into these communities, that these food deserts go away, and that we're putting
exactly.
fresh foods on the corners so that
Hmm.
people can access it. That needs to happen right now. Absolutely. But is it going to happen before we cure this vaccine? Before
But
we
the
cure
truth
this
of the matter, though,
pandemic? Probably not.
yeah, Dr. Butler, I hear you 100%. And I think I guess where I live is in the both end. I believe that we can do both at the same time.
Sure.
So we can do it is it's not even an urgency, it's an emergency. We're in an emergent situation. Absolutely. At the same time, sort of short of going from house to house and just tying people down and sticking the shot in them, what else can we do?
Right.
There's
But
nothing else we can do, but we can get a little bit more intentional around exactly what you said, Dr. Butler, around the ways we coalition build and we collaborate with people that do hold the power of the pen around policy, around accountability, around consequences, around programs and plans, and 1,000,000% around funding.
Funding. You got
All
to
comes
use
down to
capital.
funding.
Yeah, there's no need to have the
Absolutely.
conversation without
That's right.
economic.
Without that, exactly. And I think that that's so true, that the emergency for me then, intervention wise, is how do we right now, right? To your point, right now, coalition build, collaborate around this. How do we release those funds? How do we create those funds, release those funds, distribute those funds to address those root causes while hopefully beginning to build that trust and trustworthiness? Because I actually say I don't talk about community mistrust or distrust. I talk about institutional untrustworthiness. We have
Sure.
historically and contemporarily been untrustworthy, and
That's right.
therefore, we have earned the distrust that
That's
they
right. That's
exert
right.
with us. It's unfortunate. We are now in a pandemic, but that's the whole point. Is that yes, a stitch in time saves nine, like Mama says, right? Like, let's not get to the emergency where it becomes an emergent and we need things now, but
Yeah,
we haven't done
exactly.
the due diligence to make it easy to address the emergency. Black people didn't cause this emergency. Now,
Sure.
all of a sudden, folks just want to be all up in the neighborhood, like, shoot, 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 right? Like, I'm just talking about it from from the perspective of the folks that think in this manner. I'm not
Sure.
saying that I condone it. I
Quickly, in
understand
regards
it.
to, I'm sorry to cut you the wonderful panel off. I don't know if there are any other questions because this has gotten dynamic truly, and we are blessed and thank you for it. Any other questions that we might put for Mr. Butler? I specifically have one quickly. As doctors on the inside, do you know, besides, let's be real, the neighborhood communities are not looking at the news about the CDC. They're not looking about the herd immunity. They're more in regards to Dr. Opara's my food, my rent, my my son getting home safely. But in regards to the vaccine, getting that money or that recognition in the community from the doctors, or however, I don't know how it's generated besides CDC saying their little guidelines. How can we bring in the community leaders to get it in the neighborhood?
Yeah.
Well,
It's
Is
faith-based
there a
organization.
plan besides the
well,
CDC saying their list? Is there a
Right.
plan from the doctors?
I think one way is to incentivize the situation, because they're just throwing money at people for free. But if you really want to have something happen, pay them to get the vaccine.
All right.
We're talking about giving them $600 and $1,200 checks for nothing
Sure.
just to sit home. And you say, you want to end this pandemic, and here's an informational flyer, and you get this vaccine, we give you $1,000. Now that vaccine will fly off the shelves.
That's right.
And a lot of these so-called skeptical people will be right there at the front of the line. Where's my $1,000? And you could rapidly bring, but basically, if you
Might
incentivize
be
the
100.
vaccine, that you're actually helping protect your country and your community by getting immune to the vaccine by doing the series and literally pay people for it rather than paying them for nothing, you could conquer this thing rapidly. But you have to have the infrastructure in place to actually producing a vaccine. So it's a combination of things. But I
Yeah.
think that's the easiest way to overcome this.
I love that. I hadn't heard that one. And I
Let,
think
let me, let me Dr.
incentive
Bell,
is
let me
huge.
Dr. Bell, let me interrupt. Now, it was one more question that we had as, how do you feel about, surgery and I'm talking about not necessarily cosmetic surgery. I'm talking about um, needed surgery. What do you think about that? And after this question, we can go to the audience.
When you say what do you think about, you mean during the pandemic?
I'm talking about non-elective surgery. Surgery you have to have. What do you think folks should do? Naturally, you're not going to want the cosmetic surgery or surgery that you don't necessarily need. I'm talking about non-elective surgery that you need to have. How do we handle that, and how has that affected us? Yeah.
I think if it's surgery you truly need, like emergent surgery, you better get yourself in a hospital and have the surgery. They have protective gear. You can wear a mask, and you have N95, and you have. But I mean, so many people are dying at home now because they're afraid to go to the hospital, and they're taking chances with very dangerous conditions, like sitting home 2 or 3 days with chest pain. And then they come in, and I've actually done this. I've diagnosed, heart attack. Like, boom, you had a recent MI, and then they have a second, hit, and so it's really bad. But I mean, necessary surgery. The personnel take precautions. The operating room staff, even with aerosol generating procedures. But I mean, I just think it's a shame for people to die from non-COVID matters that they could be safe from if they go to the hospital, if it's really something they truly need. That's my take.
Okay. Any other input on that surgery, non-elective surgery?
Ditto.
If not, you got something, Dr. Butler.
No, just ditto. Ditto what Dr. White said.
Okay. All right. Yes. Now let's go to the audience. If you have any questions pertaining to COVID-19 and health disparities, please chime in. Be respectful of the next person that might have a question. If you have any questions, input, go ahead.
We would ask that you raise your hand to be identified.
Raise your hand to be identified as the attorney.
That's Coleman. And then, yes, and this is Attorney McCoy. And then we're going to keep going, and as long as it's okay with everybody, till about 5:45. But this has been an excellent panel. Yeah, I asked the question about surgery because there are people who are afraid to go to the hospital. I've had some medical procedures I've had to get done, and I did it, but I can't. I mean, honestly, you just scared that if you go in there, so you're going to catch something. I mean, I know I went in for a procedure and they said that I was in a non-COVID area. But we are hearing about situations where people, Black folk, are getting sick at home and they're scared to go to the doctor. They're scared to go to the hospital because you're scared you're going to go and you're going to get COVID.
So, I can chime in a little bit more about that. So I can just tell you, I've been in the field. I'm a practitioner first and academic second. So as far as being in the field, I mean, in the ERs, they're taking precautions. Like they test you, if they think that they're going to admit you, you get a COVID test. And now most of the facilities are up to speed where you can have a COVID test result back anywhere from 1 to 3 hours. And you generally are put in a room where you're not going to have contact with other folks. And the hospital personnel, they all walk in, wearing masks and everything. But as far as if you really have anything serious, like you think you're having a heart attack if you start having blood come out in your bowel movements or in your urine or something like that, though these types of things that are obviously suggesting something serious, you should get them taken care of. The other thing is to also put COVID into perspective, not to try to downplay it, but put it into perspective. Is that COVID overall has about a 2% or less death rate overall. So, I mean, if you really think you're having a heart attack, it's much more concerning to not get treated and possibly die from that than the small risk that you would get COVID with all of the precautions that are in place. I personally haven't seen any person actually get COVID from being in the hospital, and I don't know how many patients that is since early last year at this point. A lot of people. I have not seen it actually happen. And, hopefully people get this out into the community. But, COVID, it obviously is dangerous, but compared to a lot of like medical emergencies and serious health problems, it has a death rate much lower than traditional medical problems that are sort of like an emergency type situation.
Yeah.
Right. And I know that is interesting about the way that they report on it, because I've looked at some of, there's the Johns Hopkins site and there's the Worldometer, but the media reports the deaths, but they don't report how many people recovered. I mean, it is interesting. It's like, it's very spooky boo, even though more people recovered than die. But that I noticed that's a problem, because I've had relatives in my family, my extended family, that have gotten sick. Some of them have died, and some of them I feel literally got scared to death because of the media, because of what was out there. Some of them, they already had comorbidities, and then they were scared, afraid to go to the doctor right away. But for this wonderful panel, I do have a question as far as any suggestions you have for remedies. Like my mom is Nurse Pam. She's a retired nurse. Shout out to her. She's given some suggestions, but I mean, for me, I take on a daily basis, I take zinc, turmeric, elderberry. I have emergency on standby just in case I start to feel symptomatic, or chlorocedrin. But do you guys have any medicines or any remedies that you suggest that people take maybe on a daily basis as a preventative measure?
Can I just thank you, Robin, for that great question. I do want to, I'll let my panelists answer that question, but I did want to build on what Dr. White was sharing. About, I think there's a study by the American College of Emergency Physicians that showed that about 29%, so almost 30% of the population is delaying their care or avoiding care, period, because of fear of contracting the new coronavirus. So I really just want to emphasize that please, this is going to cause, and we're already seeing that significant increase in mortality, meaning, deaths, and morbidity, meaning just, other illnesses and poor conditions, because not of COVID directly, but because of disease conditions that other disease conditions that were not paid attention to because of fear of coming to the healthcare setting. So we're talking cancers. Definitely, there's been a lot around cardiovascular health. So Dr. White mentioned heart attack. There's actually studies now that looking at heart attacks that we're missing, or and folks like has been mentioned dying at home because of that. Please come to the hospital. We have now, I just really need to emphasize this. We have now all like the precautions that we take, from disinfecting and the staff that come in, everything to ensure that you are in the safe and healthiest possible sanitized settings, because God forbid, I have patients that call me and are trying to get all their care over the phone. I'm like, actually your symptoms are very concerning. I need you to go to the ER. No doc, just tell me what to take or to drink. I'll go pick it up. But I ain't going to the hospital. So that's very heartbreaking. So I really want to encourage you. I can understand in the like March 2020, maybe April, but now 2021, that we've gotten a routine down. We know enough that we can keep people safe in the hospital or the clinic. And as long as we are all following the precautions, everyone's wearing your mask, your shield is not needed, you're sanitizing, we control the number of people that come into the hospital, all of that, to ensure that we decrease the likelihood. Your folks are more likely to contract COVID in the community than in a healthcare setting. You're actually safer in
That's
the
right.
healthcare setting
Oh,
and
yes.
out in the
Oh,
community.
yes.
So please, if you have any concern, health concern, do not hesitate to come and get your care done. And then also, God, I hope that more and more folks are using telehealth. So if your practitioner uses telehealth, use that, and maybe they can tell you if they really need to see you or have you be seen. So I really want to enforce that, because it would just be a crying shame to lose folks this way. Not even from the pandemic directly, but pandemic induced fear that then results in, worse care for all these other conditions. And I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it a lot. Cancers that are getting, folks are not getting their screenings on time. Folks are delaying other, like, evaluations and procedures and visits, with consultants. I'm seeing, and it's really sad. So please, I plead with you. You're safer in the healthcare setting even than in the community. So please come be seen. Okay, with that, I turn it over to my colleagues to answer the question.
I have one comment. I would like to say one thing though. I do recommend that you not delay very important care. But one thing is, like the one type of care I would advise caution against is going to dentists. Now, not to say, now, if you have tooth pain or if you really have a true problem, you should go to the dentist and get it taken care of. But if you're asymptomatic and you have no trouble right now, going to dental offices where, those, a lot of what they do in there, what we call aerosol generating procedures, and you're in there for an extended period of time with no mask, and depending on how the office is set up, if they don't have good ventilation, that's the one thing that I think could be a little risky. And you need to make sure how your dentist is conducting business, and because that could be a little risky. But other than that, almost any other type of care, especially ER care, I wouldn't recommend anybody even think about delaying that if they're having any concerning symptoms or signs.
If your dentist has HIPAA, so I'll say for my dentist, you can go run through a checklist, and which is anyway a good practice to have when engaging with businesses and organizations anyway in the pandemic. Having a dent, even your pizza delivery people, like the Domino's down the street, around you should close your ears, but the Domino's down the street, um, they know Dr. Opara's or checklist by now. Are they wearing masks? Are they wearing gloves? Are they wearing blah, So with the dentist, like for our dentist, they have the HEPA, it's called HEPA, HEPA filtration system through their set. He did a whole renovation of the whole place. They use an N95 and a surgical mask. They use a face shield. They double up on gloves. So there's some very strict procedures that they follow. So for that works for us. So I would just add that just as a caveat to what Dr. White is saying, because I mean, dental disease is the number one actual chronic illness, if so, and especially with our folks with diabetes and our folks with other sort of metabolic cardiovascular disease, the dental care and our hygiene is a very important and often overlooked part of care. So if that's what you need to do it. But you can absolutely, to Dr. White's point, to ensure that your dental facility has met those criteria. Everyone is wearing N95 and the surgical mask and their face shield. There's a HEPA filtration system, etc. I think you should be safe.
So we have a question, a raised hand from Judge Denise Page Hood. Would you like to ask your question?
Well, I was just going to make a comment. I think you guys brought in some great docs. I love them. I trust them very much. And I'm glad you're doing this. I just wanted someone ask about the reported recoveries. And if you go on the Michigan COVID-19 website, they always list the number of people recovering on the same page as they list the deaths. And one of the news outlets, it's either Channel 4 or CNN, also lists the number of recoveries too. But thank you guys very much for putting on this very great program.
Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, thank
Great,
you.
great point. The media sensationalizes. That's what they get paid for, right? That's what they do to get you to get ratings, and to the point around ensuring that we know, one, how many people succumb to the illness, but how many people really whose lives were saved or who were able to continue to live on. That's something that we should hold the media accountable to, so that great information gets out there. That's one thing that I do in my hospitals. I have now 17 hospitals that I manage, and we talk about lives saved rather than lives succumbed. And that's something that the public needs to hear. But, to the point earlier, vitamin C, so having your emergency on hand is good, just in case you have some symptoms, but you could take vitamin C daily. You could take that daily. Zinc has been proved actually in recent studies to help with prevention of COVID-19, and then vitamin D. So those three were the ones that I've seen in the New England Journal of Medicine that talks about just living healthy every day and taking those vitamins to help with your immune system. This is all about increasing your immune system, and the risk factors actually are cause inflammation and cause your immune system to be weakened. And that's obesity, that's hypertension, that's diabetes.
And if I may also add to that, in addition to taking supplements, and absolutely, if that's what you feel like you need to do, go ahead and do that. That does not supplant maintaining a healthy lifestyle overall. And that includes what Dr. White's talking about, to the degree that you're able to, that is within your capacity financially and otherwise, via access, to ensure that, you're eating, healthy meals, you're getting some form of exercise, even just walks around the neighborhood, if that's safe and accessible and available, or walks around the house, or YouTube videos, or Peloton, whatever your thing is. Okay, that is getting enough sleep. I cannot overemphasize the value of sleep. That is practicing those self-care practices we talked about, and working with your family, and laughing and loving and enjoying the life that we have, even though it's imperfect, but being grateful that we have it. Practicing and the practice of meditation, prayer, mindfulness, gratitude, all those things working together. And if you have chronic conditions, that you're taking care of those. So if you have hypertension, diabetes, renal disease, autoimmune illness, whatever it is, but that it is at goal, it is well controlled, you're working well with your healthcare practitioners to ensure that you're on the right meds, you're taking them regular, all of that. So that is the foundation. Then upon that, you can add these supplements, you can add these extra, pieces, but the foundation needs to be built and strong. So I really want to, strengthen that, that piece. And I did want to add, again, in agreement with my colleagues, but also add the piece about COVID. So recovery. And yes, we need to give the whole picture. The complete picture is so important. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie said that, the danger of a single story, in her talk, A Danger of a Single Story, it's not that stereotypes are wrong or false, but they're incomplete, and that's the danger. So it's always important to give both sides. I would just also add, and this is why, when we talk about emergency and the urgency about this novel disease, is for those that do recover, though, we are seeing sequelae, what we call sequelae, meaning complications. We're seeing them a few weeks after, a few months after. We're seeing strokes. We're seeing clots,
Blood
blood
clots.
clots, yes, in the legs, in the lungs, so pulmonary
Yes.
embolisms and deep vein thromboses. We're seeing heart failure. Okay, we're seeing others weird, just autoimmune,
Yeah.
just,
Lung problems,
yes,
oxygen,
every
lung
system, yes,
fibrosis. Yes, a
Yeah,
lot
yes,
of
I'm glad that you
fibrosis.
guys got to that, because that's one of the questions that we have, the question in the chat about what are the long-term effects that you guys have seen from COVID.
Exactly.
And yeah, I do see an alert from Madam President. I'm going to give you guys each 2 minutes to close out, and then we're going to turn it back to Madam President Rita White to close us out. But this has been awesome. You guys have been a wealth of knowledge. I know we're probably going to have you come back and share, give us some updates. But you guys have been a wonderful panel. So yeah, 2 minutes each. We could start with Dr. Butler.
Sure, I had to come to my office so that I can see you all, and I wish I was able to share my screen. But I just thank you for the opportunity there. I just saw Judge Denise Page Hood, and she's a confidant of mine. I don't make big decisions without talking to her first, our first lady. But I just thank you all for the opportunity. And I just want to say that, I mentioned that one study, And we didn't get a chance to talk about maternal mortality in the African American community and what we face as moms. You saw my daughter, that's my husband, Stephen, who's the moderator. You probably saw my daughter sneak behind. And I was blessed to be able to have a good pregnancy. I was in residency and I did a 30-hour shift and then I went and pushed her out. I didn't have much hypertension, but many of us do. And so the amount of stress and pressure that's on the first humans that Dr. White mentioned this, and I agree, you know, we are the first people. And as women, we have a lot on us to the point that Dr. O'Para mentioned with taking it all and making sure that our husbands are healthy and, you know, bringing home the bacon and frying in the pan too. We have to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. But the maternal mortality in this country is something that we need to be aware of, and we need to figure out how to fix it in African American women. But the study that I mentioned that was in the Washington Post a week ago, this sums up, I think, the information that you've received, at least from what I want you to know. And that study basically talked about Black babies that were born and had Black OB/GYN and or pediatricians to care for them after they were born. The infant mortality rate halved. So that means that in the time frame for infant mortality is within the first year of life. After they were delivered or had access to Black physicians, when you look at the numbers halved, decrease in death in Black babies because they had Black physicians taking care of them. That's so powerful to me. And that information just talks so much about my vision around increasing the number of African Americans in medical schools and making sure that we put support behind them to ensure that they are able to matriculate in our communities. But it's so powerful having that ability to be able to take care of people. We have to really focus on increasing the numbers of culturally competent physicians. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Butler. I'm gonna put it on Facebook too. Black Doctors Matter. That was very powerful. So if we could take it to Dr. White, if you could give us your 2-minute closing.
Okay. Well, I just want to say thank you for having me on as a panelist, and it's been fun. I would just like to emphasize, obviously, you know, my take on prevention, lifestyle and diet is huge. One of the most detrimental things you can do to impair your immune function, once again, is eating or drinking refined sugar. You know, it's especially if you think you're starting to become ill, you should avoid like drinking pop or some kind of sugared up drinks like that, and just eat a really good healthy diet. One type of fruit that intrinsically has a number of like antiviral type compounds are citrus fruits, particularly oranges and lemons. And garlic also is a very powerful antiviral agent. So, you know, you just sort of do a little bit of self-doctoring, good nutrition, avoid eating a lot of processed food, and get good exercise, at least, hopefully, at least 3 times a week, at least 2, 3 times a week, and just get good sleep. And don't hesitate to seek help if you think you have an emergency situation, but do remain cautious and stay at home for anything that's not necessary for you to go out, and especially to mingle with other people without protection of, you know, and that type of thing. So as far as I do sort of like ditto all of the general preventive measures that have been talked about by the other doctors, and also as far as improving the outcomes for Black people, I agree that it's really addressing all of these systemic racial disparities that is really going to help solve these problems. And I find it curious that we have all of this research that shows that refined sugar is more addictive than drugs, but they haven't gone after anybody to try to regulate how much of this stuff you put in food or anything, but then they want to regulate marijuana. We still have people now who are trying to get out of prison because of drug offenses, when the biggest crime has been what they've done with so-called food, destroying people's lives with complete lack of, I mean, just like lack of conscientious regulation, and even seeing how it's affecting people on a population scale. They still haven't really done much to try to protect people from bad formulations of what's really toxic food. So that's sort of like my take on things.
And Dr. White, I'm a visual learner, so I already made a sign for myself. Eating a lot of sugar is bad, okay? Because I need to hear that. In my family, we have diabetes. I needed to hear that. So thank you for your wonderful comments. And now if we could turn to Dr. Opara, a very passionate activist doctor, if you could give us your 2-minute closing.
Thank you so much, Attorney Robin. Thank you, Attorney Ritter. Thank you to BWLAM for inviting me. Thank you to my amazing co-panelists. I learned so much from each of you. Thank you so much. I appreciate you all. My just a quick takeaways. Number one is that self-care is advocacy. It is self-advocacy and it's community advocacy, because we can't, pour from an empty cup. So if we have to be full so that and feel so that we can then pour. So self-care is truly is resistance, is advocacy, is revolution to me. And so that is so key. I want to remind you of the breathe mnemonic we talked about. Again, I'll share my slides as a PDF with Attorney Robin so she can disseminate and you can remind yourself as to what those each mean. And then also you can have access the self-care bingo. And so I want to encourage you to just think of what we talked about, one self-care activity that you can do differently, at least this week. This week, as we enter this week, what is just one activity you can do? If you're already practicing many of them, what can you add on? What can you expand? So that's one of the things. The second thing is really to emphasize the need to coalition build. I'm so grateful that our Black lawyers invited us as physicians, but beyond these conversations, we need to take this collaboration outside the Zoom platforms. How do we collaborate around policy? How do we collaborate around advocacy to address those root causes that result in the health disparities that we've talked about? Dr. Butler has more than adequately, informed us about, right? We know that those are all rooted in systemic racism and structural racism, and how it shows up in education and transportation, criminal justice, housing, et cetera, and et cetera. So we need more opportunities for coalition building. I myself have been working in that capacity with legislators and lawyers, looking at policy to address medical racism, so that what happened with Dr. Susan Moore doesn't happen to anybody else. And so this is an example of some of the things that we can do. And then thirdly, I want to invite you all to follow me on Twitter at INNODIM. I'll put it in the chat. And also please feel free to share your social media, because I want to learn from you. I'm also on Instagram, the same, and I tweet and IG, but mostly tweets a lot of my advocacy pieces and things that I'm doing in the community and things I'm part of or things I hear about. I love lifting up the work of other Black geniuses as well. So I invite you to do that and share yours so I can follow and learn from you. And I wish you all a wonderful evening and a wonderful week.
Thank you, Dr. Opara. And Dr. Butler, we'll look forward to getting your PowerPoint so we can share that with our membership as well. And thank you, Mr. Stephen Butler, who's also, I saw in the bio, a PhD candidate. I know you're soon to be Dr. Butler as well. So thank you for being our moderator today. And I'm going to turn it over to our Madam President, Attorney Rita White, to close it out. But thank you all for staying with us to have this very important conversation with these expert analysts of doctors.
Thank you so much, all of you. This is the main reason why we put these planning sessions together, to really come up with some very relevant, important presentations on issues that are very, very pertinent to what's going on in our society and continues to pervade in our society currently. Now, as we see, we have a powerhouse. We've seen a powerhouse of doctors here, and that's why we strategically pick these doctors, because these doctors are extremely dedicated in their work, their line of work, and they know what the root cause of all these issues that we're dealing with in our community. So what I'm going to just encourage everyone is advocacy, as Dr. Opara indicated. Basically, we need to be outreach. What you heard today should not just stay in this Zoom meeting. We need to disseminate this information through everyone that we know, everyone that we talk with. We need to make sure everyone is very up to date on really what's going on with all of these issues regarding COVID and pre-existing issues and how to treat them and what to avoid. So again, I appreciate all of you, and I hope that you will continue to basically be torchbearers to our community and our world. And if you have your slides again, if you can please pass them on to Attorney McCoy or me. And again, thank you so much. This has been, I believe this has been one of the most enlightening, important, and most beneficial presentations that we've had since 2021. So thank you, everyone.
Thank
And
you.
everyone give them a round of applause, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. You guys be blessed.
Thank you so much. I put my email in the chat as well, so you can.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Have a good night, everybody.